You jump out of your car at the butt of Lewis, most northerly point of the Outer Hebrides, and a geology bombshell goes off in your face. Not a tweedy lecture, or an incomprehensible page of strange words and facts, but a proper gasp moment. You stand by the tall brick stalk of the lighthouse, and the seaward view is of a riot of strikingly coloured cliffs and sea stacks, as naked and contorted as when they first formed in the nascent Earth's crust 2,000 million years ago. It looks as though a toddler giant has been at work with a box of plasticine, a toddler with a penchant for oranges and greys, whites and blacks. These rocks at the northernmost tip of the Isle of Lewis have been jammed together in layers and thoroughly squeezed out of the horizontal and out of kilter. Directly opposite the lighthouse, bands of orange, grey and brown bend in a tight arch among fellow layers, all canted out of the sea at 45 degrees. The neighbouring stack appears to be similarly slanted until you look down near the roots and see how the toddler's fists, pushing from both ends, have caused the rock to crumple and sinuate, each roller coaster wave outlined in white quartz. To the right, a fat, stubby stack, as treacle-brown as newly cut peat, has been turned inside out and upside down, the edges bent vertical, the flanks swooping over and down in extravagant arcs. The violence of the contortions, the implication of gigantic heat and force and pressure are mind-boggling. This Lewisian gneiss was formed when the world was young. It's twice as old as the oldest forms of life ever discovered in Europe. Yet there are rocks not far away on Lewis, even more sensationally shaped and coloured, that came into being more than 1,000 million years before these sea stacks at the butt of Lewis. I sat on the rabbit-nibbled turf in the sunshine and wind, staring. Last time I'd been here, it had been in a week of solid rain and mist, conditions that seemed to love the Outer Hebrides island chain, and particularly the Isle of Lewis. They had clung to its dour moors, its wide flat bogs and thousands of tiny lochans and skimpy coastal settlements, as though reluctant to part company. In those days, the lighthouse had still had a keeper living on site, and he'd allowed me to climb the tower and gaze on many miles of rain-swept moor and white-capped sea. For all that, back then, I hadn't taken any account of the wild and ancient geology on display right under my nose. It's not only easy but almost obligatory to fall into conversation with anyone you meet in the open air of the Outer Hebrides. Just along the road from the lighthouse, I fell in with one of the Morrison clan. "They're all Morrisons round here," he said. "I was born here and I love the place." I remarked on the number of elongated fields into which the land either side of the road was divided, narrow strips 6 or 7 strides wide and up to 400 metres long. "Those are the crofts, and they go with the house, each one belonging to a family. People in the old days would farm sheep and cattle, corn and vegetables on their crofts, potatoes in the ridge beds, you'll see those down on the cliffs, and peat from the moors. Everyone had their peat bank, and we'd cut them and dry them and use them for heat in the kitchen and in the fireplaces." Morrison smiled diffidently. "I have the electricity now, but I still like to have the peat fire, the smell of it, the warmth and light it gives off." I mentioned the cliffs, the banded colours, the eons of their infinitely slow formation. No, it is the higher power that has created them," said Morrison. "Don't you believe in a higher power? I used to be an evolutionist, but," he spread his hands for emphasis, "no way. Everything in this universe is so finely balanced, don't you think? There has to be a higher power that has ordered it." There was total sincerity in his voice. A screaming posse of Arctic terns saw me off on my journey, graceful red-beaked flyers with long streamer tails and fishwife voices, apt to dive-bomb and try to peck your brains out. A squadron of gannets flew south in strict line astern, a mile out to sea, their sharp black wingtips beating regularly. Far out beyond them, 50 of their fellows splashed and plunged soundlessly after an invisible shoal of fish. Cracks in the ancient rock have given the cliffs a multitude of ledges, crevices and hollows. Guillemots had built tuffet nests out of seaweed and cliff plants. The tubby little seabirds were tucked away in the shadows, but their location was betrayed by a generous whitewash of guano immediately below each nest. A shag with an iridescent green neck squatted above them in a little rock garden of thrift, painstakingly pulling out plants, assessing and then rejecting them. One by one he dropped them down the cliff past the guillemot tenement, until at last he succeeded in pulling out a lump the size of his head, with a long root attached. It must have exactly fitted his nest design, for he flew off clumsily, unbalanced by the root dangling from his beak.